They say time only moves in one direction, but in Hollowgate, Wisconsin, the clock tower did not agree. It did not chime forward like other town clocks. It did not strike 12 with the promise of a new hour, a new day, a clean slate. Instead, it ticked backward, slowly, stubbornly, returning each second to where it had already been, and when it rang, the guilty flinched. Because in Hollowgate, the guilty always heard it loudest. This was not a metaphor. The clock tower truly reversed time, but not for everyone, only for those who had done something wrong. And in 1857, wrong was not a theoretical concept. It was ink on a page, blood on a cloth, a secret wedged under a floorboard. No one remembered when the clock first turned its hands against the natural order. They only remembered the man who wound it, Elias Venn, the watchmaker. He was not born in Hollowgate. He came from somewhere colder, with a stitched leather suitcase and a voice too calm to be comforting. He moved into the small stone building across from the courthouse, the building no one had used since the old tannery burned down. By the next morning, a sign hung on the door. Time repaired. Here. That same week, the clock tower started ticking in reverse. At first, the townspeople laughed. Judge Hilda Marsh called it a mechanical trick, a novelty for fairs. She told her clerk to ignore the townsfolk who whispered that the tower was cursing people, showing them things they weren't ready to see. She had ruled Hollowgate for 17 years. Nothing made her uneasy, not until Gordon Pike's confession. Gordon was the blacksmith, broad, coarse, red-knuckled from ironwork. He was not the sort of man who wept, but on the third Sunday after Elias arrived, Gordon interrupted the service at St. Lillian's. His hands were shaking. He claimed the clock had spoken to him, that it had turned back the hour he had killed his brother-in-law. "I saw it," Gordon said, trembling in the aisle. "I saw myself take the poker. I saw him fall again, only this time in reverse. He stood up bleeding, then the blood went back in, and I walked backward into the dark." No one spoke. The priest asked if he was drunk. Gordon said he hadn't touched drink in a month. Then he dropped to his knees and said he needed gold before the clock took more from him. By that afternoon, 4 people came forward with similar stories. They had seen things they had done, terrible things, played back by the tower's backward toll. The sheriff dismissed it as hysteria. The judge said nothing, and Elias Venn, when asked if he had tampered with the mechanism, simply replied, "It tells the truth to those who've lied." That night, a firefly storm overtook the hills beyond Hollowgate, and in that flickering gloom, the clock struck midnight for the second time that day, only backward. People swore they saw shadows walking in reverse, mouths moving before voices came. But the next morning, only one fact remained. Judge Hilda Marsh found a letter in her chambers that she did not remember writing. It was folded in 4, with her seal. Inside were words she had not spoken, thoughts she had not consciously formed. A sentence stood out. "I buried the ledger beneath the tree, not to destroy it, but to preserve myself." There was no ledger in her office, but a tree did stand behind the courthouse, the one her father had planted when she first took office in 1840. That tree had grown crooked over the years, its roots buckling the earth like veins under the skin. She stared at it that morning, fingers tightening around the note, and realized something chilling. The letter was in her handwriting, and the ink was still drying. Judge Marsh never shared the contents of the note with the town council. She never asked the groundskeeper to dig under the tree, but she did send her bailiff away for 3 days, and no one knows where she went during that time. All anyone remembers is this. When she returned, she looked 10 years older, and the clock struck backward 3 times before sunrise. Each chime echoed like breath in a crypt, long and hollow. Few in Hollowgate slept through it. Those who did claimed their dreams unraveled like ribbon, running in reverse, faces aging into youth, conversations ending before they began. But for Judge Hilda Marsh, there was no sleep at all. She sat in her parlor, the curtains drawn, the hearth long cold, and stared at the envelope now burned to ash in her fireplace. She had memorized every word. She could recite them in the dark without moving her lips. I buried the ledger beneath the tree, not to destroy it, but to preserve myself. The word preserve rang louder each time she repeated it. It was not protection. It was embalming. No one knew what the ledger contained. No one but Hilda. 37 names, written over 17 years, each one passed through her court. Not all had been guilty, not all had been sentenced, but all had made her nervous in one way or another. Men who spoke too loudly, women who questioned too often. A boy who stole bread 3 times and stared too long when she addressed him. Hilda had decided what Hollowgate needed. Order, not fairness. Control, not forgiveness. The ledger had kept her from forgetting the weight of each decision until one winter when the ink began to blur and she could no longer stomach what she'd written. She buried it on a night with no moon. The snow hadn't fallen yet. The ground split easily beneath the oak. No one saw her, or so she believed. The next day, Elias Venn stopped by the courthouse. "I noticed the time ran slow this morning," he said, adjusting the cuffs of his coat. "Must be a burden, holding so many minutes inside you." She dismissed him quickly, but something about his phrasing stuck like a thorn under her nail. Holding minutes inside you, not passing through time. Holding it, as if the clock tower only reflected what she already carried. 2 streets over, Gordon Pike hadn't left his forge in days. Smoke poured from his chimney night and day. The iron glowed white through the slats in the shutters. Some said he was reforging the poker that killed his brother-in-law, turning it into something holy. Others whispered he had begun making things that reversed their own shapes in the heat. Nails that unbent, horseshoes that recurled. When asked what he was doing, Gordon only muttered, "Preparing for the hour that won't let me pass." Children no longer played near the clock tower. At night, they said the tower whispered. Not words, but the sound of unwinding, like thread being pulled from a coat sleeve or a wick pulled from a candle's center. One girl, 7 years old, came home sobbing. She said she saw her twin brother inside the tower's reflection, even though he had died at birth. By the week's end, church attendance doubled and then tripled. Fear sharpened faith, but Elias Venn did not attend, nor did he mingle. He worked in silence. His little shop ticked with the synchronized motion of 27 pocket watches, all turned backward on the shelves. The only piece that ticked forward was one he never touched, Ernst's, a locket-shaped timer sealed in glass, resting on a red velvet cloth. No one had ever seen him open it, and those who looked at it too long claimed their eyes blurred and their tongues tasted of tin. One Wednesday afternoon, Hilda Marsh entered his shop. "You know what this is?" she said, her voice dry. Elias looked up. His spectacles reflected nothing. "I know what it's becoming." She placed a silver coin on the counter. "Can you stop it?" "No," he said, "but I can offer clarity." Then he reached beneath the counter and brought out a device not made of brass or steel, but of charred wood and crushed velvet. It had no face, no hands, only the soft sound of breathing, rhythmic and slow. "What is that?" she asked. "It's your hour," he said. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward it, but the object pulsed once, warm and organic, and she recoiled. Outside, the tower struck backwards again, but this time, something was different. It struck 4 times. And across town, 4 people fell to their knees without knowing why. One collapsed in the bakery, hands buried in dough, another in the schoolhouse, chalk falling from their fingers. The third staggered on the steps of the church, whispering a prayer they didn't remember learning. And the fourth, Marilyn Pike, Gordon's wife, dropped her laundry basket in the snow and began to weep, though her lips never moved. None of them remembered hearing the bell, but each claimed to have seen the same thing, a backward shadow of themselves, retreating into an hour that no longer existed. They could not explain it, could not articulate the deep nausea it left in their bones, the sense that something had peeled back a layer of their skin and looked inside. By sunset, Hollowgate knew something had changed. At the forge, Gordon Pike stood before a smoldering anvil, holding a ring of blackened iron. It was shaped like a bridle, but had no place for reins. No buckle, no point of entry, just a continuous loop marked with etchings that shimmered faintly in the firelight. "She's been marked," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. "The clock chose her. Marilyn, she'll walk backwards by next Sunday." Elias Venn, standing at the edge of the workshop, adjusted the minute hand of his own pocket watch and said nothing. No one had invited him there, but no one asked him to leave either. They had begun to accept quietly that Elias did not follow the laws of arrival or departure. Later that night, Marilyn Pike stood at the mirror and tried to remember her mother's name. She couldn't. She remembered the grave, remembered the funeral hymns, but the name, 3 syllables, soft and English, dissolved the moment she reached for it, as though someone had plucked it from her memory and wound it backwards into oblivion. She covered the mirror. Across town, Judge Marsh began preparing a sermon. Not for the court, for the town itself. She did not sleep, did not eat. She sat by candlelight and wrote feverishly, scratching the words into her old trial ledger, the same one she had once buried. Ink ran where the paper had been wet, and moths circled her lamp with hypnotic insistence. "The tower is not a curse," she wrote, "but a measurement. It does not seek to punish. It seeks balance." She underlined the word balance 4 times, then burned the quill and whispered a name no one else knew. At sunrise, she rang the bell above the courthouse herself. The townspeople came reluctantly, not because they distrusted her, they didn't, but because they feared what they might see if they looked too long at her face. When she addressed them, the air itself seemed thinner. "You've heard the clock," she said. "You've felt its pull. This is not sorcery, not madness. It is a reckoning." Behind her, a crow landed on the courthouse roof. It turned its head once, then disappeared without a sound, almost as if rewinding itself into the sky. "Every choice leaves a trace," she continued. "The tower measures what we try to forget." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Old Benjamin Wilkes shouted from the back, "Why now? Why Hollowgate?" Elias Venn appeared at the edge of the assembly, just past the lamp-post, because time is thickest here. No one knew what he meant, but no one doubted him. That afternoon, a new rule began in Hollowgate. The townsfolk called it the hour of reversal. Each night, at exactly 9 p.m., the clock would strike once, and for the next 60 minutes, strange things occurred. Footsteps echoed before they were made. Lanterns flickered in patterns not caused by wind. Conversations repeated out of order. Dogs barked at nothing, then wagged their tails as if meeting an old friend they hadn't seen yet, and sometimes, only sometimes, people vanished. Not violently, not with sound, just gone. One blink, and the space was empty. When the hour ended, no one spoke of it. They only prayed their names weren't next. On the 5th night of the hour of reversal, someone left a note nailed to the church door. It was written in charcoal on torn parchment, trembling script barely legible. "The tower shows what can't be undone, but what if it never should have been done at all?" Beneath the words, a single fingerprint smeared the corner. Too small to be an adult's, too ridged to be a child's. Reverend Moxley burned the note before sunrise, claiming it was blasphemous. But others had already seen it, and rumors spread faster than the wind through Hollowgate's cottonwoods. That same morning, Elias Venn was seen entering the belfry. No one had ever watched him climb those stairs. The tower was old, built before the town charter. Its bell had been cast in iron smelted from 6 melted crucifixes, a detail pulled from one of Hilda Marsh's personal annotations, long hidden in the courthouse ledger. She had once written, "If we bind time to sacred metal, does it sing or scream?" Inside the belfry, Elias moved like someone returning to a place not seen in lifetimes. He touched the gears as if greeting old friends. The pendulum, rustless despite the tower's age, swung with a rhythm too precise to be earthly. It didn't tick. It pulsed, as if matching a heartbeat no longer present. Then Elias did something no one expected. He stopped the mechanism. The clock froze at 9:44. And all across Hollowgate, time followed suit. In the bakery, the flour hung mid-air, never falling. In the tailor's shop, a dropped spool hovered between hand and ground. Outside the schoolhouse, a falling snowflake paused a foot above a child's outstretched tongue. But more than the world stood still. Thoughts locked in place. Guilt calcified in the minds of the guilty. Memory lost its forward edge. The town became a tableau of secrets unspoken and moments unchosen. Every sin paused at the threshold of recognition. Only one person moved freely, Judge Marsh. She emerged from her house at exactly 9:45, wearing her judicial robes. Her face was calm, her hands empty. She walked the full length of Main Street, her footsteps muffled, though no snow fell to dampen them. When she reached the tower, she looked up at Elias, still framed in the belfry window. "You made your point," she said. "No," Elias replied. "Time made its own." She entered the base of the tower without another word. No one followed. They couldn't. The air wouldn't let them. It was as if the world itself had narrowed to 2 actors, both too aware of their audience to speak too loudly. Inside, she found it where he said it would be. Not under the floorboards, not behind the old gear case, but in the base of the bell itself, a hidden compartment, warm to the touch. Inside, the ledger. She hadn't buried it alone after all. The names were unchanged, but next to each now sat a mark. Not ink, not blood. Something else. Each mark pulsed faintly, like breath held just too long. At the bottom of the final page, her own name had been added, Hilda Marsh. Under it, a time. It was 9:45 and ticking. She took the ledger and stepped outside. Hollowgate still lay frozen, but one thing had changed. Everyone's eyes followed her. Frozen bodies, moving eyes. The tower began to hum again, a sound like metal remembering heat. Elias turned the gears once more, setting the mechanism to resume, but Hilda placed her hand on the frame and said, "No." He stopped. "If this town is to be judged," she said, lifting the ledger above her head, "it won't be by a machine." Then she opened the book and held it to the bell, and the tower began to ring without being wound. No hand turned the gears, no pendulum swung, yet the sound poured from the bell like breath from a buried mouth. It did not clang like iron, but thrummed like bone. Low, resonant, ancient. With each toll, the ground beneath Hollowgate vibrated slightly, just enough to loosen memory from where it had settled too deeply. The frozen snow began to melt in the shape of symbols. People stirred, but did not wake. Only the eyes moved still, those wide, unblinking orbs following Judge Marsh as she stood beneath the bell with the ledger raised above her head. It did not catch the wind. There was no wind. Time had not resumed, but sound had. Sound and judgment. Elias Venn stepped down from the belfry and joined her at the foot of the tower. "I told you," he said, his voice oddly kind. "It doesn't punish. It reveals." She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the page, the marks beside the names, those breathing sigils, had begun to shift, curling like ash in reverse. Some names faded, others glowed. "Why me?" she asked. "Why my hand?" "Because you wrote the first one," he said. "And the tower doesn't forget beginnings." Far away, in the Pike home, Marilyn sat upright without blinking, her lips parted, not to breathe, but to murmur something soundless. Across town, Reverend Moxley's sermon notes began to rewrite themselves. The pages flipped backward. Ink rose from the paper and coiled mid-air before vanishing into his pen. The clock tower rang again. Third toll. The trees bent toward it. Not from wind, but deference. Some would later swear they saw roots shifting underfoot, earth buckling around the courthouse tree, the one planted when Hilda took office. Its bark cracked like old paint. Beneath it, a box trembled free of the dirt. The second ledger. Hilda turned her face upward, squinting against the lightless sky. "No one will believe this," she said. "They won't need to," Elias replied. The fourth toll came like a shudder. Snow dissolved entirely. Footsteps reappeared in soft earth where no one had walked for hours. And Hollowgate exhaled. People gasped. Not all, but many, as though surfacing from an invisible sea. Time resumed its crawl. The church bell tolled noon 3 minutes late. Horses neighed nervously in their stables. Infants who had not yet learned to speak began to cry out names no one had taught them. One by one, the people of Hollowgate emerged from homes, shops, sanctuaries. Their bodies moved, but something in their faces had changed. Not fear. Recognition. Gordon Pike dropped his hammer at the forge. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember what I wasn't supposed to." He ran to Marilyn. She was standing barefoot in the snowless yard, looking at her reflection in the metal pail. "I watched myself die," she said calmly. It wasn't violent, just backwards. In the schoolhouse, a boy raised his hand during lessons and asked, "If time is a circle, does that mean heaven comes twice?" His teacher wept. The tower rang a 5th time, quieter now, more internal. It seemed to come not from the bell, but from inside the people, from their marrow. Judge Marsh closed the ledger. Its cover was warm. "Do we keep it?" she asked. Elias looked skyward. "No, the tower keeps what it needs." She placed the ledger on the courthouse steps. By the time she turned around, it was gone. That evening, Hollowgate held no court, no church, no council, only silence. But at 9 p.m., as the hour of reversal began again, something new happened. The clock tower did not chime. Instead, its hands stopped at exactly midnight, both of them, and pointed straight down, and in the darkness, every door in Hollowgate unlocked at once. No wind touched their latches, no human hand moved among them, yet from the courthouse to the cellar doors of Gordon Pike's forge, from the apothecary's rear entry to the barn lofts along Sallow Street, locks clicked open in perfect synchrony. Some fell open with a soft groan, others swung wide into the night, creaking like throats ready to speak. Those who heard it described the sound not as intrusion, but invitation. Most stayed in their beds. Some sat bolt upright, hearts pounding. A few brave or foolish souls rose and dressed. They stepped onto their porches, lamps in hand, only to find the air unusually still. No insects, no rustling grass. The town breathed in a hush that made even prayers feel like trespass. Judge Marsh stood barefoot in her nightgown at the top of her stairs, staring at her open front door. It had not been ajar when she retired, nor had the bolt ever failed. Her breath fogged slightly in the airless house, and then she noticed it. A shoe print on the wood floor, bare, human, but reversed. The heel pointed forward, the toes behind. Someone had entered her home by walking backward. Down the street, Elias Venn lit a lantern without flame. the glass filled with light, but the wick remained unburnt. He hung it on the clock tower's door and stepped inside, alone once more. Except he wasn't alone. For the first time, someone had followed him. Not a citizen, not the judge. A girl, young, no more than 12. Her name was Minna Ellsworth, daughter of the town's shoemaker, mute since birth. No one had seen her speak a word. Yet when Elias turned, she was already halfway up the belfry steps, and in her hands she carried a watch, one he did not remember making. "Where did you find that?" Elias asked gently. Minna did not answer with words. She simply opened the watch. Inside, instead of gears, were teeth. Small, infantile, still rooted with blood. Elias stepped back, genuinely startled. "You weren't born here," he said softly. "But something brought you." Minna tilted her head. She placed the watch on the ledge and touched the bell. It rang once, not audibly, but inside their bones. Elias felt the marrow in his arms tremble. Minna did not flinch. Outside, at that exact moment, all open doors began to swing shut. Not violently, but deliberately, as if the wind had changed directions in reverse. Hollowgate had inhaled. Now it exhaled. The next morning, no one could explain what they'd seen, or what they hadn't. Some remembered dreams. Others remembered nothing but the sensation of walking up stairs they hadn't climbed. Reverend Moxley, once proud and sure in his vestments, was found kneeling in the snow in front of his church, holding a blank Bible. Every page had been wiped clean, yet he kept reading, line by line, as if the words were burned behind his eyes. In the schoolhouse, Minna Ellsworth sat at her desk. For the first time in 12 years, she raised her hand. The teacher, Miss Fenwick, nodded hesitantly. Minna spoke. 3 words, quiet but clear. "The clock knows." From that moment, no one dared to interrupt the hour of reversal, not even with breath. Gordon Pike removed every clock from his home. Judge Marsh ceased court proceedings altogether, and the townspeople began a ritual, unspoken but unanimous. Every night before 9 they placed a single item outside their doors, an object of memory, something tied to guilt or silence. A photograph, a page torn from a diary, a silver brooch, a spent cartridge. By morning, each object was gone. No one ever saw who took them, but Hollowgate became quieter, softer, not calmer, never that, but less dishonest, and beneath the hush, beneath the rituals, a question remained. If the clock could turn time backwards for the guilty, what would it do to the innocent? No one in Hollowgate dared ask this out loud, but silence, as the clock had proven, was never protection. It merely delayed the answer. And one quiet morning, that answer arrived, wrapped in burlap and placed gently on the steps of the schoolhouse. It was a bundle. Inside, a child's shoes, worn, muddied, small. Stuffed between them, a note written in spidery cursive, faded but legible. He walked backward into the river. He said the water remembered him. There was no signature, but the handwriting matched a journal found decades later beneath the Pike residence. One belonging to Marilyn's older sister, long thought lost in a blizzard when she was 8. Her name was Annabeth. She had never been found. Until now. Minna Ellsworth read the note silently, her fingers brushing the paper like a blind woman reading bone. "I didn't know him," she whispered to Miss Fenwick, who hadn't even asked the question yet. "But he knew me." At that moment, across town, Elias Venn stopped repairing a mantel clock and looked up, as if hearing something crack far beneath the soil. He left the shop without a word and walked barefoot to the edge of Stillwater Creek. There, beside the willow roots, lay another watch, not of his make. Its hands spun wildly, not backward, not forward, just circling without rhythm, as if caught in a current it could not escape. He picked it up and frowned. The case was made of pine. Burned pine. Salvaged, perhaps, from the church fire of 43, back when the old pastor vanished mid-sermon, leaving behind only ash and his melted spectacles. Elias did not pocket the watch. He placed it in the creek and watched it sink. Then, for the first time since arriving in Hollowgate, he spoke directly to the air. "You brought her here," he said, "and now you're trying to bring her back." No one heard him, except the tower. At 9 p.m. that night, the hour of reversal began as usual. But something changed. This time, the town felt younger. The streets looked the same, the buildings unchanged, but colors seemed richer, edges sharper. The old walnut tree behind the bakery bore blossoms no one had seen in 30 years. The horses in Mr. Ludd's stable had foals, though none had been pregnant. And the townspeople, they wept, not from pain, not from joy, from memory. They remembered things they had long buried. They saw their fathers whole again, their children unbroken, their own reflections not yet tarnished by shame. Some fell to their knees, some ran into the woods, a few dropped to the ground in fetal positions, clutching the soil like infants. In a study, Judge Marsh opened her cabinet to find her old wedding ring, the one she had thrown into the river the day her husband disappeared. It lay there, dry, without a speck of rust. Elias stood beside the clock tower, watching the hands spin freely. "This is not mercy," he murmured. "It's temptation." Behind him, Minna appeared. She held a book. It wasn't the ledger. It was smaller, leather-bound, etched with the symbol that had once glowed beside Hilda Marsh's name, a spiral within a square. "This isn't Hollowgate's story anymore," Minna said. "It's the clocks." And as the words left her mouth, the chimes began. Not from the tower, from every object once touched by guilt, the locket in the bakery, the nail from Gordon Pike's forge, the rifle cartridge buried behind the church. They rang in harmony, tuning the town to a frequency no ear had heard before. A new hour was coming, but this one wouldn't reverse. It would erase. The shift began quietly, not with thunder or fire, but with omission. A name forgotten mid-sentence, a photograph fading at the edges, street signs missing a letter, memory unraveling from the corners inward. At first, no one panicked. Hollowgate had adapted to much worse. But by the third day of the new hour's onset, something became terrifyingly clear. The clock tower had stopped marking guilt. It had started consuming evidence of time altogether. Judge Marsh awoke with ink stains on her hands, though she hadn't written in days. Her law books were blank. Cases she once memorized now ended mid-verdict. She flipped page after page, hoping to recall what she already knew, but the names eluded her, even her own. She stood before the mirror and whispered, "Hilda," like a question. There was no echo. Elsewhere, Minna Ellsworth walked through Hollowgate with the leather-bound book tight in her grasp. Its pages remained intact, but each word she read aloud caused something in town to flicker. A lamp dimming unnaturally, a cat freezing mid-stride, a man forgetting which child was his. Elias watched her from the clock tower's shadow. "She's not reading for knowledge," he said. "She's invoking." Gordon Pike had heard enough. He'd lost too much already. His brother-in-law, the forged tools that now reversed themselves, and the voice of Marilyn, who no longer spoke, not from fear, but because her tongue had vanished entirely one morning, leaving a smooth silence behind her teeth. He marched to the square, torch in hand, demanding the tower be torn down. "It's not justice," he shouted. "It's not truth, it's hunger." Others nodded. Some wept. A few dropped their offerings outside their doors earlier than usual, as if bargaining with something that no longer accepted bribes. But no one struck the tower, because deep down, every resident of a Hollowgate knew what had become of time. It wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the structure that watched them, that pulsed with memory and decay. And now it was cleansing what it had once catalogued. Erasure was its form of mercy. That night, Hollowgate changed again. The sky took on a bruise-colored hue. Stars appeared out of order. The moon, for the first time in recorded history, rose not in the east, but directly above the tower, hanging motionless. And then the hour began. Not at 9, not at midnight, but at a time no clock could point to. First, sound vanished. Footsteps became mimed gestures. Dogs opened their mouths, but barked silence. The town bell swung on its own, ringing nothing into the air. Then, light fractured. Shadows detached from their owners, moving independently. Lamps cast halos with no centers. Eyes reflected scenes not yet lived. Funerals not yet held. Arguments not yet started. Minna stood at the town center, book open. The final page had only one sentence, written in red: "When the innocent are devoured, the hour is complete." She didn't understand it, or perhaps she did, and chose not to react. Elias appeared beside her, not walking, but arriving, like someone finishing a sentence left hanging. "You can close it now," he said softly. "I can't," Minna replied. "Then you must choose." A gust of wind, the first in days, lifted the edges of the page, and somewhere near the forge, Marilyn Pike began to fade. Not collapse. Not die, fade. First the outline, then the color, then the presence. Gordon screamed, but could not hear himself. Elias turned to Minna. "This is not punishment," he said. "It's the price of resetting what should never have been turned." She closed the book, but it was too late. The clock tower rang once, its first forward chime in 102 years, and across Hollowgate every mirror shattered inward, not with violence, not with shards flying out, but as if something from within had reached toward the glass and drawn it inward, folding reflections into a place that was no longer here. In some homes, the splinters dissolved to dust on contact. In others, the cracks remained, perfect symmetrical webs frozen in time, humming faintly like breathing frost. Judge Marsh was one of the first to see the aftermath. Her bathroom mirror had not shattered. It had imploded, collapsed into itself, leaving behind a hollow recess in the wall, not deep, but pulsing. She leaned closer. Inside the cavity, a faint image flickered. Her father's face, just as she remembered it in 1840. But his lips were sewn shut. She recoiled. Outside, people gathered in silence, holding what pieces remained of their mirrors. Not everyone had seen a vision. Some swore their reflections had been replaced by others entirely, lost siblings, strangers, or younger selves mouthing words they no longer remembered speaking. One child had seen herself holding a burning match to her own diary. Another saw her twin walking away into fog, though she'd never had a sibling. By sunrise, fear returned to Hollowgate in a new shape, not of punishment, but of permanence. What was revealed would not fade. Elias stood beneath the clock tower, both palms resting on the stone base. His eyes were closed. He was listening, not to the tower, but to something beneath it, something no one else could hear. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. "It's begun," he whispered. Minna stood beside him. She said nothing. She hadn't spoken since she closed the book. The leather-bound journal now hung around her neck by a silver chain, sealed shut with a lock no one had seen her attach. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Gordon Pike hadn't slept in 2 days. He roamed the edges of town with a hammer in one hand and Marilyn's shawl in the other. She was gone. No trace. No belongings, not even a boot print, only her absence, louder than any scream. He asked Elias if the tower could bring her back. Elias didn't answer. He only looked at the moon, still hovering directly above the bell like a sealed pupil, unmoving. That day, the judge reopened the courthouse. Not for trials, for reckoning. One by one, townsfolk entered the chamber, led not by guilt but by compulsion. No records were kept, no words were spoken. Each came bearing one object, placed it on the bench where verdicts were once passed, and left a lock of hair, a bloodied handkerchief, a ring box never opened. The courtroom floor was covered in artifacts by dusk. The judge didn't collect them. She simply sat and watched the pile grow. But then came the unexpected Reverend Moxley. He entered without an offering. He walked slowly, one hand on his chest, the other behind his back. His eyes were darker than they'd ever been, as if sleep had abandoned him weeks before. He approached the bench. I remembered, he said quietly. Something I shouldn't have. He pulled a candle stub from his coat and placed it down. No one ever lit it, he said, because no one knew it existed, except me. The candle shimmered briefly, then split down the middle. From inside, a photograph, sepia, torn, and impossibly old. A child's face. Not the Reverend's, but Minna's. Beneath the photo, a date, August 3rd, 1823. 34 years before Minna was born. Judge Marsh stood slowly. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Reverend Moxley's mouth moved, but the answer came from the air. "She gave it to me, before the tower was built." The courthouse trembled slightly. Outside, the hour struck, not by bell, but by breath. Everyone in Hollowgate inhaled at once, and Minna, standing under the tower, smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, she whispered a word. Again. The wind that followed was not of weather, but of memory. It passed through Hollowgate like breath exhaled from the lungs of the dead. Curtains swayed without breeze. Lantern flames bowed but did not flicker out. Graves thudded softly in their sleep. And beneath every floorboard, beneath every stone, something stirred. It was not the first time Minna had said the word, but it was the first time she said it aloud. Elias Venn turned sharply from the tower, his mouth parted slightly in recognition, or fear. "You weren't meant to remember that," he whispered, more to himself than her. But Minna's eyes never left him. She stepped forward, the book still bound at her throat like an anchor, and with each pace, Hollowgate unraveled slightly more. Window panes fogged from the inside. Clocks began to spin, some in reverse, others forward, others in spirals. A pitchfork at the edge of Gordon Pike's barn rusted before his eyes, and then unrusted, as though time couldn't decide what it had done. At the courthouse, Judge Marsh felt it too. The floor beneath her cracked, not from weight, but from age that had been erased, then reimposed. The wooden beam above her desk warped subtly, groaning like a thing returning to a moment it didn't survive. She stared at the photograph the Reverend had placed. Minna's face, unchanged from the girl now outside, yet marked with a date from a time she had no right to inhabit. "Before the tower was built," she repeated. "Before—" She turned to Moxley. "What do you mean she gave it to you before the tower existed?" The Reverend lowered his gaze. "She found me in the forest. I was barely 20. I'd come here to plant the first cornerstone." His voice trembled. She said, "This town needs remembering, not recording." I didn't understand then. I thought she was a spirit, or a fever. "But you kept the photo," the judge said. "I buried it. Then one day, it unburied itself." Outside, the moon began to move. Just slightly, but unmistakably, it tilted, then reversed, then vanished entirely, as if blinking through time like a skipping stone. The townsfolk gathered in silence, drawn by nothing, compelled by everything. They formed a half-circle around Minna, whose small frame now seemed anchored to the earth in a way no child should be. She raised one hand. Her fingers did not point, but curled. An invitation, not a command. Gordon Pike stepped forward. "What are you?" he asked, voice rough with grief and desperation. Minna did not answer him directly. Instead, she looked toward the tower and whispered, "What was built once will always be built again." Behind her, Elias Venn collapsed to one knee. "She's not a girl," he said, choking. "She's the moment." Judge Marsh emerged from the courthouse steps, carrying the Reverend's candle and the photograph. "You are not from before the tower," she said. "You are the tower." Minna finally turned to face her. "I was the first to forget," she said. "So now I remember everything." Then she stepped into the base of the tower. No one followed. No one moved. And at that instant, all of Hollowgate began to shift. The houses did not crumble. They dissolved. The roads unwound into paths of dirt and then forest. The church bells melted into sap. The cemetery stones became unmarked soil, and the tower itself, the structure that had defined the town, its spine and its wound, folded inward, not destroyed, not toppled, folded, like paper containing a secret. Minna's voice echoed from the hollow where it had stood. "When the innocent are devoured, the hour is complete," she said again. But then came the part no one had heard before. And when the guilty forget why they weep, it begins once more. The words didn't echo. They rooted, fell into the soil of a Hollowgate like seeds in tilled grief. There was no more tower, no more courthouse, no more lamplit homes huddled in quiet dread. There was only a memory of the place, held together by the will of those too broken to forget and too frightened to let go. Yet they remained. Not all. Some vanished outright, erased clean from the ledger of time. Gordon Pike stood where the forge used to be, holding Marilyn's shawl against his chest, though there was no warmth, no weight. He spoke her name once. Then he, too, was gone. Not in death, not in passing, just gone. Like chalk wiped from a board never written on, the rest wandered the edges of what had been. Grass now grew over cobblestone. Trees older than their own bloodlines reached skyward from where floorboards had creaked, and above it all, a silence not empty, but expectant. Judge Marsh stood at the center of what was once the square. In her hand, the photograph still fluttered, though there was no wind. The child's face stared upward. "You weren't born," she said softly. "You were remembered." From the shadows stepped Elias Venn, tired, smaller than he'd ever appeared before. "I've seen her before," he murmured, "but never twice." The judge turned. "Explain." He sat on the earth, cross-legged like a child at confession. "Every place that sins in silence is given a marker," he said. "Not punishment, not warning, just a mirror. Something to remind them what they chose not to see." He looked up at her, eyes dull. "Minna is the mirror." Somewhere behind them, a bell tolled, though there was no tower left to house it. The people turned instinctively, but saw nothing, yet they felt it. The hour had not ended. It had only paused, and now it resumed. Hollowgate began to rebuild itself, not by human hand, but by echo. Cobblestones reassembled. Brick rose from the grass, beams stretched back into frames. The courthouse stood again, perfect in every detail, except for one. Its foundation bled. A thin trickle of dark fluid ran from beneath the stone. Not blood. Ink, the ink from the judge's old ledger, still wet, still warm. Minna stood atop the steps. She looked unchanged, but no longer young, ageless, framed not in time, but in purpose. She held the leather-bound book once more, its lock gone, its pages fluttered. "I've let you forget too long," she said. "Now you will remember everything." The townspeople screamed, not from pain, but from clarity. Each was shown what they had hidden, what they had buried, what they had convinced themselves had never happened. The orphan girl whose mother was traded for land rights. The stable boy who disappeared after seeing too much. The young wife buried as a suicide when it was her husband who drowned her, hour by hour, with silence, every moment of complicity, every choice to look away. The ledger filled itself in real time. Names old and new, dates from yesterday and from generations before. Beside each a mark, some glowing, others flickering. Judge Marsh opened her mouth, but no sound came. Instead, a moth emerged. It flapped once, then crumbled. Minna approached. "You knew," she said, "but you refused to believe." "I tried to stop it," the judge whispered. "You did," Minna nodded, "but only after you helped it begin." Elias stood, trembling. "What are you?" She stepped past him, hand outstretched. "The first hour," she said, "and the last." Then she touched the foundation, and the courthouse sank into the earth, not fast, not sudden, but slowly, with the gravity of guilt made manifest. The people did not run. They watched and wept, not because they were sorry, but because they remembered. That was the wound the Clocktower had never needed to inflict. It had only needed to peel away the layers of forgetting, not punish, not even accuse, just expose. And what was left beneath the surface of Hollowgate's soil wasn't horror. It was pattern, a shape repeated so many times it had become architecture. The foundation had always been this: silence, rot, and ritual. Minna stepped forward from the place where the courthouse had been. Her feet didn't leave prints, not because the earth was hard, but because the earth already knew her. The ledger was full now, not just of names, but of decisions. The pages, once bound in leather, had softened to something almost organic, breathing slightly, responding to her fingertips like muscle memory. Elias stood nearby, no longer watching her with reverence or dread, but with resignation. "I was the one who designed the clock's face," he said quietly, "but I didn't know what it would watch." Minna looked at him, and for a moment she seemed simply a girl again. Not a keeper, not an hour, just a child who had carried too much. "You never asked what the hands were pointing to," she said. Elias blinked. "They don't tell time," she continued. "They tell direction. To what? To the place where forgetting begins." Behind them, the tower began to rise again, not stone this time, but wood. Weathered planks, blackened by age and fire, emerged from beneath the town like bones climbing to the surface. No nails, no scaffolding, just memory assembling itself into something that couldn't be ignored any longer. Gordon Pike's old forge reappeared beside it, half-formed, smoking gently from the chimney, though no fire burned. The bellows moved, the anvil dripped something thick and dark. In the town square, the people gathered. They were older now, not in body, but in weight. The cost of seeing themselves had aged them. Reverend Moxley clutched a pocket Bible that now held only one verse, written over and over in a spiraling script. "You cannot forgive what you refuse to remember." The trees bent toward the tower as it neared completion. The air grew heavy with the scent of cedar and ash. And when the final plank slotted into place at the belfry, Minna opened the book one last time. The final page was blank. She placed her palm against it. A mark bloomed beneath her skin, a spiral, identical to the one that had once appeared beside Hilda Marsh's name. But it didn't burn. It pulsed. "I am not the punishment," Minna said aloud, her voice carrying across the square. "I am the interval, the pause between ignorance and reckoning." No one spoke, because there was nothing to say. The people of Hollowgate stood still as she ascended the wooden tower, each step echoing not through the structure, but through their bodies. When she reached the top, she did not ring the bell. There was no bell, only a circle of mirrors, each facing inward, each reflecting something no one else could see. Minna stepped into the center. Her figure blurred slightly, not from light, but from memory, unstitching itself as the mirrors drew in her shape. She looked down at the town, at the faces no longer pleading for mercy, just listening. And then, in a whisper, she spoke the final question. "Will you forget again?" And Hollowgate did not answer. because the answer had always been in the silence that followed, in the way hands touched doorknobs just a second too long, in the way eyes flicked toward corners even when nothing moved, in the way the sun never truly rose the same way twice. The ledger closed, the mirrors cracked, and the tower waited, because the hour always comes, and when it does not knock. It remembers who forgot to listen. The new tower never struck the hour with sound. It struck with presence, a tension in the marrow, a cold behind the eyes. It was never seen moving, and yet every morning it was taller. Not visibly, but perceptibly. It loomed differently, like it had leaned closer in the night and was deciding whether you were worth stepping over or stepping on. Hollowgate, if it could still be called that, no longer observed time. There were no clocks, no church bells, no routines, but the townspeople knew when the hour came. They felt it in the tightening of their skin, in the flickering of their thoughts. Memories overlapping like leaves pressed together in a book that was being thumbed too quickly. Judge Hilda Marsh no longer judged. She sat beneath the courthouse tree, grown again from a single splinter of its old trunk, and listened. Sometimes people approached her, but they did not speak. They simply sat beside her, letting the silence build like sediment. She no longer needed to ask questions. Every face carried its own answer. Some carried more than one. Reverend Moxley had stopped preaching. Instead, he painted crude icons on the backs of old hymnals, figures with mirrored faces, eyes on their palms, mouths sewn shut. He hung them in the branches, dozens of them, fluttering like gilt in the wind. And still, no one could say why the tower had spared them. Perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps the sparing was the punishment. Minna had not been seen since the night she stepped into the circle of mirrors, but sometimes children swore they saw a girl's reflection in puddles, even when standing alone. A shoemaker's son said she spoke to him in his dreams, asking him questions in languages he had never heard, but somehow understood. Do you remember what you were before you knew what guilt felt like? Do you believe silence is ever innocent? Would you reverse it all if it meant never learning the truth? Each time he answered, he woke to find something different about himself. His shadow shorter, a scar moved to the other arm, a word missing from his vocabulary, forever. Elsewhere, Elias Venn wandered the outskirts. He carried no tools. He fixed nothing. He only watched. He watched how buildings reassembled themselves in the wrong order, a barn with no floor, a window looking into itself, a house with a staircase leading up to nothing but sky. He knew this was the tower's way of testing perception. What happens, he whispered once, when we no longer know what a door is? On the 13th day of the new cycle, the moon reappeared, but it bled. A crimson halo rimmed it, and those who looked too long forgot the names of their children. They remembered their crimes instead. One woman ran into the woods screaming apologies for something she'd never confessed to. Her body was found days later, perfectly preserved, except for the eyes, which had been turned inward. The townspeople stopped naming their grief. They began to refer to it only as the remembering. Each time the tower pulsed, be it by shadow or wind or sudden loss, they felt it deepen, not like a threat, like a root system spreading. Something beneath them was growing stronger by their admission, by the burden of what they now chose not to deny. Minna had said she was the interval, but what then was this? Not judgment, not healing, something older. A state between sin and salvation, the space in which a soul recognizes itself, too late to change, but too soon to escape. And on the 14th night, when the tower's shape shimmered like wet stone, a new sound emerged. Not the bell, not the breath, but a knock. Not from the tower, but within it. The knock came not as thunder, but as a suggestion, soft, rhythmic, undeniable. It came from no floor, no stair, no bell. It came from the hollow marrow of the structure, like something long sealed was stirring. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 again. then breath. By the third night, the pattern was known. 3 knocks, a silence, a breath. Then the mirrors began to reappear. Not in the tower, but in the homes, behind curtains, inside drawers once nailed shut, beneath pillows where children had once dreamed safely. Each mirror showed only the same image. A door, plain wood, iron handle, etched with the spiral. No one dared touch the glass, not even Judge Marsh, who had come to terms with every horror Hollowgate had revealed. But this wasn't memory. This wasn't punishment. This was invitation. The invitation to open what had never been meant to open. Elias Venn was the first to speak aloud, what they all feared. "It's not Minna behind the door." He stood in the square, voice cracked with wind and time. It never was. She was the keeper of the hour, but the door holds what the hour was built to contain. Reverend Moxley refused to listen. He had taken to carving spirals into his own palms now, believing pain would absolve what remembrance could not. He walked the town, hands dripping with truth, muttering fragments of names that belonged to no one still living. Children whispered about the knock. Some claimed they had heard it from their own chests. Others said they saw it in the sky, stars rearranging themselves into triplets of light, then vanishing. But the door remained closed, until the 14th knock. It came at dusk, during the soft hour when shadows began to blend into walls. Everyone heard it, even the dead, the graves in Hollowgate, long since swallowed by grass and fog, trembled. Names on tombstones briefly lit up in pale blue, only to fade again, replaced by different ones. Names not yet buried, names still spoken aloud, names of those who had never left. The knock this time was not a request. It was a warning, and Hollowgate responded with stillness. Even the birds went mute. Judge Marsh found herself before the rebuilt courthouse, though she did not remember walking there. The door stood open. Inside, the chamber was different now, lined with mirrors, a spiral floor, and at the center, Minna's book suspended in air, pages open to the middle. No wind turned them. They fluttered on their own, slowing as she approached. Each page now contained not words, but reflections. Moments, not just hers, but the town's. The moment Gordon Pike struck his brother in anger. The moment the judge herself signed the order that condemned the Ellsworth family's land to seizure. The moment a child's scream was muffled by the closing of a cellar door. Each page a truth. Each truth an offering. She did not cry. She simply nodded. And as she reached to touch the book, the mirrors around her rippled. The door was opening, but not from without, from within. Inside the tower, where no one had dared climb since its return, a shape moved. Not Minna, not Elias, not any face they had known. It stepped once, softly, yet its footfall cracked glass somewhere far away, and then the voice came. Not from the tower, from every throat at once. It asked only one thing: have you prepared the hour? And every man, woman, and child answered together. Yes. And then, finally, the door opened. But not in the tower, not in any mirror or cellar or forgotten room. It opened in the air itself, directly above Hollowgate Square. The space split like fabric, soundless, seamless, wide. No hinge creaked, no handle turned, just a threshold of black framed in a spiral of pale gold suspended against the fading sky. The people stood beneath it. None screamed, none fled. This was not a terror they needed to escape. This was the end they had always expected, always deserved, and now, finally, recognized. Judge Hilda Marsh stood at the center, eyes unblinking. The book had closed, but its weight had not lifted. She felt it in her lungs, her spine, the ache behind her eyes. The truths it had shown would never be unlearned, not even by those who vanished. Elias Venn stood beside her, hands clasped, the spiral now etched faintly across his palms. This is not retribution. he said softly. "This is restoration." From the open door came no light, no sound, only a pull, a gravity of memory. Objects began to rise, first gently, then with purpose. The ledger, the mirror, shards, the stone from the old forge, the handle from the church's bell, even the weather vane from the mayor's house. Each hovered upward and vanished into the door without resistance, as if pulled back into the center of what made them matter in the first place. Then the names began, not shouted, whispered, heard only in the heart. Marilyn Pike, Annabeth Ellsworth, Lydia the midwife, Reuben the stable boy, every name Hollowgate had ever tried to forget, floated upward. Not in grief, but in recognition, as if the sky itself were reading the true census of a town that had never truly died, only hidden its truth in layers. The door pulsed, and from within it, a figure emerged. Minna, but not as a child, not aged either, just whole. Her form no longer shimmered, no longer flickered between memory and presence. She was entirely here, entirely now. Her face carried no judgment, only completion. She stepped gently onto the square, and as she did, the townspeople knelt. Not from command, not from fear, but from understanding. This was the hour completed. Minna walked to the center, the spiral glowing faintly beneath her steps. The book floated to her hands and opened to the first page once more. Now the ink moved in real time, writing only one sentence. "Those who remember are free." She looked up. The tower, the door, the earth. They waited. Then she turned to Elias. "Close it." He nodded. He raised one hand, and the sky stitched itself shut. Not harshly, not with finality, but like a breath being exhaled. The door sealed, and the hour ended. But Hollowgate remained. No longer cursed, no longer innocent, just real. A town rebuilt not from stone or timber, but from truth. The clock tower did not return. There was no need, because the spiral had moved into the people, into their stories, into the way they would now speak names aloud, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. And if you were to visit Hollowgate now, you would find no map to guide you, no roads marked, no records preserved, but you might hear a sound, a soft ticking, not from a clock, from a heart, or a breath, or a story finally told. Because in Hollowgate, time no longer runs backward, it listens, it waits, and when the hour returns again, as it always does, it will not ask who sinned. It will ask who forgot, and then it will begin once more.